Hey everyone, welcome back to BizBlend, the show where we talk about what actually happens behind the LinkedIn headlines. Listeners, today I want to start a little differently. Most of us are told that if we just work harder, push more, sleep less, we will eventually crack the code of success. But then life hits back. The promotion comes with panic attacks. The big deal closes, then you are at the bar alone. The revenue graph goes up, your mental health goes down. Listeners, my guest today knows that tension in his bones. From the outside, he was the classic corporate rock star, youngest bank manager in Michigan, climbing the ladder at American Express, Whirlpool, Illinois Tool Works, managing hundreds of millions in revenue. On the inside, he was battling bipolar disorder, addiction, arrests, and a brutal morning routine of asking himself if he even wanted to be here. At some point, he faced a choice that a lot of high performers secretly fear. Do I want to be healthy or do I want to be successful? Because it feels like I cannot have both. But instead of accepting the trade off, he built a system. Well, he calls it the HOT system, operational turnaround, a way to take the best parts of the hypomanic thinking, like insane focus and bold pattern recognition, and turn them into a repeatable business playbook without destroying yourself in the process. Listeners, he used that operating system to generate hundreds of millions in value, turn around struggling businesses, and still show up as a sober husband and dad who actually sleeps at night. And his new book, The Unfair Advantage Weaponizing the Hypomanic Toolbox, is now on pre order on Amazon. We'll definitely explore about that in the conversation later. But listeners, it is a bipolar inspired business manual in story form that asks a very spicy question. What if the thing you thought would end your career is actually the blueprint for your unfair advantage? So, with that, listeners, meet my incredible guest, Todd Hagopian. And Todd, welcome to BizBlend. And it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Well, thank you so much for that great introduction. That was fantastic, and it's great to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's really, really an inspiration to host you today. So let's begin with first, exploring uh, your story, your journey. I mean, there is this brutal moment, where the meds start working, the symptoms calm down, and suddenly you feel like that you have lost your edge. So if we strip away the entire, that brand language for a second, what did I lost my edge actually feel like day to day?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. So, first of all, I went about 15 years being undiagnosed. So, during that time period, I was going high in business and getting promoted. And every time something really good would happen, it would be followed up by something really bad. And I just didn't understand. It felt like it was just kind of that play hard, work hard mentality. Like those things are going to happen as you find success, and finally, as you get older, obviously that catches up to you. And at about mid-30s, those down swings really hit me a lot harder. My body wasn't handling not sleeping well. I mean, I was sleeping about 2 hours a night for 15 years. You know what I mean? And I finally started to get to where I was having headaches and chest pains and panic attacks and just couldn't quite get it. And so I finally went to the doctor and they threw everything at it, all kinds of tests. But finally they asked me if I had ever seen a psychiatrist. And I thought that was a silly question, to go in there for headaches and the chest pains and end up at a psychiatrist. But it was pretty clear pretty quickly that multiple psychiatrists were saying, yes, the problem here is definitely bipolar. It's in your brain, not your body. And so I went on these pills, and it was amazing how fast they worked. really quickly took away the highs and the lows. And so just touch on bipolar for a minute. It's not the, crazy temper that everyone kind of has in their head. It's hypomanic highs where you have tons of energy, tons of focus, tons of drive, thinking outside the box, pattern recognition, all that stuff, and then followed by severe bipolar depression. And so that's why they call it bipolar, is because you're going high to low, cycling back and forth. And so all of that went away completely. I mean, the drugs basically mellowed me out completely. So the good part about that is I felt better. The bad part about that is the hypomanic part that I had been known for, essentially, that my entire reputation was built on, evaporated almost overnight. And so it was noticeable. I was working differently. I wasn't getting as much done. I wasn't setting big goals. I wasn't going out and finding new patterns and smashing orthodoxies. But people in my life were saying, hey, you're much more present. People who didn't even know I was bipolar, who didn't even know I was on medicine, they were making comments that made it clear that I was calmer. And so it was a very weird time in my life where everybody was saying things look good, but inside I was saying, oh my God, I just got this promotion and I can't do it the way that they're expecting me to. And so that was when I had to make that choice. And it was what I ended up deciding to do was try to mimic some of the hypomania. So in my head, I was saying, if I could just think of how to do one or two of these things like I used to do, and just kind of hack my brain and weaponize my wiring and try and figure out how to do one or two of those things, I can get back to normal. And that's basically how it happened is I structured a couple of them, I systematized them, and I took them into one turnaround and turned around a business. And then at the next turnaround, I structured a couple others and systemized a couple others. By the time I got to the third turnaround, it was like, oh man, I forgot to do that one thing from the first turnaround. 13 months in, I'm going, why didn't I remember that? And that's when I decided it was time to write them all down and really come up with this toolbox of systems that I had put in place and to make sure that I hit all of them during the turnaround. And I had been teaching people these, my lieutenants, my second in commands. And so I knew that you didn't have to be bipolar to do it. Um, and so then during the fourth turnaround, I turned around and I hit everything. I had it all set up. I had them in line and I knocked them right out. Boom, 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 boom. And just had a really rapid, really hard turnaround. And and at that point I was like, okay, I'm gonna decide to actually come out, let people know what I've been dealing with for the last 8 years, with medicated bipolar, and show people that there's value in divergent thinking and really, it's not something to be feared. It's something to be valued. Because if we all read the same 20 books, we're all going to get the same exact results. So what this book and this method is about is really, breakthrough results using differentiated thinking. And that can be neurodivergent thinking, like myself, or it could just be differentiated thinking. But it's trying to teach people to value that in the workplace. And bipolar is not something to be medicated away, and neither are other neurodivergencies. It's something to be learned from and taken advantage of and weaponized, for lack of a better word, in order to drive better results rather than just being medicated away.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is logical. I think also it's very practical. Maybe the word weaponized may look like means something else, but I think um sometimes we do need that. We do need that. One question that comes to my mind, Todd, is when you realized that some of the hypomanic states or this state of mind that actually made you successful, because you just got into the promotion, so you thought that, okay, if I don't uh, you know show that energy or that kind of productivity in there, I may not live up to the standards because of what I have been promoted. Did you feel like, when you mimicked or you maybe, thought of mimicking that, is this some kind of mask that I have to put on to make sure that, people do not realize something is kind of different with me?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely had to think about it, but this what I'll tell you is that a lot of folks who have bipolar kind of miss that hypomania when they're on the medicine, and they feel like, they get some real hard goal that's in front of them. And it's why a lot of people hop off the medicine and stop taking it. It's because they lose the hypomania. And in the old days, they could have done this, but now they can't. So the mimicking was extremely important. The hardest part about actually having these results with the medicine was the fact that I was now, sleeping 5 hours a day instead of two. So I had 3 hours less to do it. But what I found is that I had been self-medicating, right? Obviously, I had been drinking. I had been doing other things to try and get my mind right and slow myself down and be able to relax at least a little bit. Um, and so as I stopped that, as I got sober and got out of the self-medication, I found that I could be just as productive in fewer hours. And as far as like mimicking and wondering if people noticed, I don't think that crossed my mind, and it still doesn't today. I went 8 years doing it without people realizing. And the idea there is you're systematizing things. So you're teaching yourself how to do innovation differently. You're teaching yourself how to do goal setting and continuous improvement and radical focus differently. And so it all seems and is very natural. And that's why I've been able to teach people those methods without them actually having bipolar or even knowing that they were bipolar inspired, because it's just a different kind of worldview of how to tackle problems, if that makes sense.
It does. It does, Rod. It absolutely does. And what I also realize, is that um, if the real unfair advantage is not the hypomanic high, it is learning how to build systems that give you a similar level of output without needing to be on fire all the time. So
That
it definitely.
100%. And one of the key methods in the book that we talk about is the Karelin method. And it's an interesting one that touches right on what you just said. And actually your intro was perfect too. Most folks believe, that there's two ways to drive further results, right? It's activity times efficiency equals results, right? So I can either work a bunch more hours or I can get way better at my job, right? And if I do either of those things, then the equation says I'm going to get more out of it. And if I do 20% more of each than my competition, then I'm probably going to be 1.2 times 1.2. I'll be 44% more productive than my competition if I work 20% more hours and I'm 20% better at my job. And that is all true. You can just flat out work hard. You can get better at your job or start to, as I call it, automate, systematize, use AI, outsource, or reduce. Those are all the things that you can do to get better at your job and more efficient. But then the third part that most people don't focus on is the focus part. And that's where you take, and this is an example of putting a system in place where anybody can think about this instead of somebody who has bipolar. You take a look at your calendar and you 80/20, and you basically try and figure out the 4 or 5 things that you're going to do out of the 100 that week that drive the most value. And then you build your entire calendar around those things. And so, for example, if you're going to do 100 things in a week, you might only spend a half hour to 2 hours on each of them, 2 or 3 hours on each of them. But if I say I'm going to do the 80/20 squared method, which is 4% of activities drive 64% of the results, and I'm going to take the other 36% and I'm going to let the team do it, or I'm going to outsource it, or I'm going to eliminate them. And I am going to spend my 40 or 50 hours a week on just those 4 or 5 things. Now, all of a sudden, I'm spending 8 to 12 hours on each of the most important things instead of a half hour to 3 hours. And I am going to be several 100% more productive than the people I'm going up against if I do that. And I always say your calendar doesn't lie, right? Your calendar will tell you what your priorities are. So if you're in meetings about meetings and updates about updates and planning for planning meetings and things like that is what your priority is. And you are going to be less productive than me, who is going to spend every waking moment making as much money as I can every minute of the day, which is the profit per minute methodology that we use. And so that's an example of it's how I was thinking when I was unmedicated. But then you just had to package it up into a system um, that is real easy to teach and real easy to execute once you start thinking about that every day rather than just having it be part of your illness that happens to make you think that way.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That is actually, and I think the question here is for anyone who is listening and it is still addicted to their old version of this beast mode. I think the question is not that how do I get back that spark within me, but what is the actual cost of that spark or that edge? Um, so you mentioned about so one thing that I really really loved, and I kind of repeated that. So weaponizing the hypomanic toolbox. I mean, it actually sounds edgy and marketable, but then um it can also sound like glamorizing bipolar disorder. So how do you make sure that people hear this as a framework, not as maybe I should burn myself out so I can be also great too?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question because it's absolutely not what I want to do, right? So the weaponizing the hypomanic toolbox actually comes from the brand and the statement that you need to declare war on stagnation. So inside of businesses, there's kind of this 10% of businesses that are in super hyper growth mode that talk to growth consultants, right? And there's these 10% of businesses that are basically failing and about to die, and they talk to crisis consultants. There's this 80% in the middle that is in what I call stagnation. And we've all been here. We always do. We've always done it this way. We never do that. We've tried that before. You know, your best talent's leaving because you're not doing good enough, and then you're hiring in lower price, lower talent people to replace them. You haven't innovated in 5 years. You know, all these things that all of us have seen inside of our organizations. This is stagnation. And my point here in the new world is that if you haven't transformed your business in the last 3 years, then you are late. You need to transform your business from the ground up every 3 years if you want to keep up in this new world. And so my mantra is declare war on stagnation. And there's several stagnation syndrome symptoms that we go after, but that's the mantra, and that's where weaponizing the hypomanic toolbox comes into play. It's to declare war on stagnation, not to declare war on yourself. And so actually the hypomanic system, operating system um, is all about managing managing your bursts of energy. So I don't have to work 22 hours a day anymore so that I can sleep 5 or 6 hours a night. It's all about using your focus and maximizing your profit per minute so that you don't have to work as many minutes to make the same amount of profit. So it's quite the opposite of, I think, what some people hear when they hear those words, if that makes sense.
Again, it is an important nuance, because um, this is, I mean, every unfair advantage it needs constraints as well. Um, but and also, I think nowadays, I mean, especially in today's day and age, I think um, 3 years also would be like a long one. It's because we are seeing changes every month, every year, every quarter. There's some kind of changes, so I think that is actually very much needed. Okay, and let's also talk about Todd. You know this particular concept. One of your concept is grandiose goal setting. Um, okay, like big moonshot targets, aggressive growth, but then, from a practical operator perspective, how do you keep these goals from just becoming, fantasy PPTs that, would demoralize the team?
Yep, for sure. It's a great question. What I always say is under promising and over delivering is for losers, but it's what everyone's taught, right? So we're all taught to do that. That's the way to get ahead in business. But what I can tell you is that if I have two employees, one promises 6 and they get 8, and one promises 22 and they get 19, the guy who gets 19 gets promoted every single time. That it happens over and over and over again. It's not about missing your goal every time. It's about setting a big goal and finding a way to get there or come close to it because that's who is going to win in the organization. Now, how does that translate? How do you get yourself out of trouble and not get yourself into trouble over and over again? So first of all, you set big long-term goals. So you're not necessarily saying I'm going to grow 22% next year. You're saying I'm going to grow 50 to 60% over the next 2 to 3 years. And then you set smaller goals on the way there that you can get your employees excited about, that you can show progress on, that you can hit milestones. We use a 9 box of goals where we go organic growth, profit margin optimization, and innovation. And then we go 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year. So if you can imagine this grid in your head, you've got these 3 types of goals. Then you have 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year. So you have 9 boxes. And you put what you want to do inside of organic growth in the 1 year and the 3 year and the 5 year option. And you end up with these 9 boxes of different goals. And then we put in place what we call a raise your hand rule. And this comes to your question. How do you keep everyone engaged? How do you keep them pumped up about the long-term goal? And basically you say, if you are ever not working on one of these 9 things, you have permission to raise your hand and demand an answer why. And what that means is essentially, sometimes, the answer is going to be, hey, there's just some things we got to get done, and they're not going to directly align to these 9 goals. But most of the time, we can attach what they're doing to one of these 9 goals so that they can, in their head, realize that what they're doing is important to the organization, important to the long-term growth. And the nice part is these goals rarely change if you do it right. So you can reinforce them every town hall. You can talk about how the goals are not changing. The methods and the things you're focusing on may, but they're inside of this 9 box. And it allows you to pinpoint small victories that you can nail on your way to this really large vision that only happens if you get these 9 done. And that has been extremely effective at 3 or 4 different organizations now in increasing accountability, increasing people's worth. Because here's the thing, people don't complain about having to work an extra half hour a day. Right? They don't care that they got home a half hour later. What they care about is that they spent 2 hours in wasted meetings that day and then got home a half hour later. That's what makes them mad, right? So this is all about maximizing that profit per minute. And we talk about it like that. And some people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about, how much money we're making at work and this and that. But the bottom line is if they feel like they're delivering the business, they're going to feel better about their job and they're going to be willing to work that extra half hour when they need to. But if you actually focus on profit per minute, they're not going to have to that often because you're going to cut out the noise. You're going to cut out the waste.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100% it makes sense. Yeah. I mean, even I also wouldn't mind giving extra half an hour, 1 hour, because I know that what I'm going to do or what I have been doing for this entire day it actually contributed to something which is going to whether it's in profits or the numbers or the big goal, the vision that my company has set. So it absolutely.
100%. Yep.
And Todd, you know, I mean, in the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned that after 8 years, you shared. I mean, you were the high performer with the secret, like in the background, arrests, drinking, suicidal ideation, all happening while you delivered big numbers. Um, what exactly made you? I mean, what was that exact moment you decided that I'm going to come out publicly as a bipolar business leader and risk the stigma? Because there can be so many around it. So,
Sure.
what exactly?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, the main thing is I felt like I had something to teach people. I felt like I had taught different people these strategies over the years, and everybody I'd taught them was like, "Wow, I've never thought of it that way," or "Wow, this is not that hard. Why haven't I done business this way forever?" You know what I mean? And so it felt like, I'm passionate around turnarounds, right? I love turnaround management. There's certain ways to do a turnaround that are way more effective, and this operational system does that. So I was excited about teaching people how to do business turnaround, especially now that transformation has to happen so often. And then two, from a neurodivergent standpoint, it's just that I was watching all these people, and when they come out as LGBTQ or they talk about their diversity, and people celebrate them and this and that, and that was not how neurodivergence is handled in the workplace. People would say things like, oh, he had that thing that one time, and everyone would kind of smile and nod and know what they're talking about and then never promote that person, because of some breakdown or something that had happened in the past. And what I realized is that it was only coming up in a negative context. And there are so many positives about neurodivergence, whether it's hyperfocus or whether it's pattern recognition or setting big goals and outside the box thinking and all these different things that multiple neurodivergencies have, not just bipolar, that really need to be celebrated. And when I came out as bipolar, the very first thing that even my closest friends did was, what can we do to fix you? And what my message was is, you don't need to fix this. You need to take advantage of this. You need to weaponize this. You need to learn from this. And one of the best things that we can do if you have neurodivergency or if you think differently is to not blame things on that, right? You don't want bipolar to only come up when you're making an excuse or when you're blaming it on something. What you want is to be talking about the good parts, talking about the value that you bring because of your neurodivergent thinking. And then that's the light that people put it in. So that was the real reason where I said, you know what, it's worth the career risk. I'm going to come out and start talking about this and make sure that everyone's realizing that there's a lot of value in this neurodivergent thinking that can really drive breakthrough results.
Exactly. Exactly. Superpower.
Yeah.
And I think, because on BizBlend, it's not only conversations and discussions around business, but we also, um, you know, continue to blend different aspects of a person's journey in there. And I think for anyone listening who sits at this intersection of mental health and ambition, this is the real trade. Like, we might lose some shallow opportunities, but then we also gain a career that matches our actual nervous system, not just what is written on the paper or in our LinkedIn bio. And I think it's a whole different, level of ROI.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is a fantastic conversation. That's exactly why I wrote the book, so I could have discussions like this. And we're really having a lot of great discussions. People are understanding it and people are implementing it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So before we wrap up, Todd, if listeners like to get a hold of your book, connect with you, share your thoughts about this conversation, what would be the best way to connect?
Sure. So the unfair advantage, weaponizing the hypomanic toolbox is pre-ordered just about everywhere, but definitely Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And then you can reach me at toddhagopian.com. I don't sell consulting, so basically I have a ton and tons of free data out there on business transformation strategies and everything that's in the hot system. And if you have questions, just reach out, hit the contact button, and ask me a question. I love talking about this stuff, and it's all free. So we'll just have some great discussions, do some case studies, and have a chat.
That's brilliant. Listeners, there you go. You heard from Todd, and I'm going to have all these links in the show notes. So just go to them along with this episode on your favorite podcast platform. Reach out to Todd, connect with him, get a hold of his book. And what I am taking from this conversation, listeners, is simple, but then it's not easy because your wiring is not a bug in the system, it is a design constraint. You can either pretend it does not exist and keep crashing bigger and faster, or you can build an entire, maybe a new operating model around it and let it become an advantage for you. So, Todd, thank you so much for being straightforward, bold, candid, and it's really, really an empowering conversation. Thank you so much for this.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Todd. And listeners, once again, go and check out Todd's playbook, The Unfair Advantage Weaponizing the Hypomanic Toolbox. It is available out there for pre order on Amazon. And also, if this episode hit close to home, share it with one person who needs to hear that their brain is not broken, nothing to fix in there. It is just unoptimized. This is BizBlend with Sana, where we keep it real about business, brains, and the cost of chasing big outcomes. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.